A cowboy heard a baby cry in the barn. He found a woman too weak to stand beside it. His day had started before the sun, as it usually did. The air was crisp and carried the faint scent of hay and horses. The cowboy, a man used to solitude and the rhythm of ranch life, moved with quiet efficiency. He fed the horses first, loosening their blankets and pouring fresh water into their troughs. The animals snorted softly, nudging him as if to say good morning. He chuckled under his breath and scratched behind the ears of the oldest stallion, a gray horse with a gentle temperament. The ranch was quiet, almost eerily so, except for the sounds of the animals. Birds chirped in the distance, and the wind rustled through the tall grass. Life here was simple, but it was not always easy. Every morning, the cowboy would check the fences that ran for miles, making sure none of the cattle had wandered off or fallen into trouble. He loved the peace of this life, but he also knew that danger, both small and large, could appear without warning. As he walked toward the barn, he could hear the familiar creak of the old wooden gate. The barn was large, with fading red paint and wide doors that had weathered many storms. It usually smelled of hay, animals, and wood polish. The cowboy had spent many years on this ranch, and the barn felt like a second home. He was used to the quiet life, and he appreciated the rhythm of chores and the comfort of knowing he could take care of the animals and his land. But that morning, something felt different. Just as he stepped closer to the barn, he heard a sound that made him stop in his tracks. It was soft, faint, but unmistakable. A baby was crying. The sound echoed slightly in the empty barnyard, and for a moment he could hardly believe it. There were no children on the ranch. No one had lived here for miles around except him. His heart started to beat a little faster, a mix of concern and curiosity flooding his thoughts. He knew something was wrong. The cowboy approached the barn cautiously, his boots crunching on the gravel path. The crying grew slightly louder, and with each step, he felt a mix of worry and determination. He knew he couldn't ignore it. Whatever was happening inside the barn needed immediate attention. He gently pushed the heavy wooden doors open, the hinges groaning under the effort. The light from the rising sun spilled into the space, illuminating the familiar piles of hay, old tools, and the faint outline of the animals' stalls. But something new had appeared here, something that did not belong. The sound was coming from the far corner of the barn, near a stack of hay bales that he often used for extra bedding. As he walked closer, he could see movement. There, partially hidden behind the hay, was a small bundle wrapped in a thin, worn blanket. The crying was louder now, sharp and urgent, piercing the quiet morning air. The cowboy's instincts kicked in immediately. He moved faster but carefully, not wanting to startle whoever or whatever was in the corner. As he reached the bundle, the cowboy's eyes widened in surprise. A newborn baby, tiny and fragile, was lying on the hay, shivering slightly. Its small hands were curled into fists, and its eyes, barely open, reflected confusion and fear. The baby's cries were high-pitched and insistent, as if calling out for help in a world that suddenly felt too big. The cowboy's heart ached at the sight. He had never been a father, but he understood instinctively that this little life needed immediate care. Beside the baby, almost collapsing onto the hay, was a woman. She looked pale, weak, and exhausted. Her hair was tangled, and her clothes were wrinkled and stained. She tried to lift herself up when she saw him, but her strength was gone, and she fell back onto the soft hay. Her breathing was shallow, and her eyes, filled with a mix of fear and relief, met his. The cowboy realized immediately that she was in desperate need of help. He knelt down slowly, keeping his voice calm and steady. "It's okay. I'm here now." "You're safe," he said, more to reassure himself as much as her. He reached for the baby first, lifting it gently from the hay. The little one's crying softened slightly at the warmth of his hands. He wrapped the baby in his jacket to keep it warm, careful not to jostle it too much. The baby's tiny fingers clutched the fabric instinctively, and the cowboy felt a surge of protectiveness. Turning his attention back to the woman, he helped her sit up against the haystack. "You need to drink some water," he said, handing her a canteen. She took it slowly, almost trembling, and nodded weakly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He could see the strain on her face, the toll of what must have been a long and difficult labor. He realized that she had been completely alone for hours, possibly longer. The thought made him even more determined to help. The cowboy looked around the barn, thinking quickly. He needed to get medical help, but the nearest town was miles away. He pulled out his old radio, hoping to reach someone who could come fast. The radio crackled at first, then a voice answered, steady and calm. He explained the situation quickly but clearly, giving the location and the condition of both the woman and the baby. The voice on the other end promised to send help immediately. While waiting, the cowboy stayed close, checking the baby's breathing and making sure the woman remained conscious. He talked to her gently, trying to keep her calm. "You're not alone anymore," he said softly. "We'll get through this together." He could see her eyes tear up slightly, a mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over her face. Time seemed to stretch in those moments. Every sound, the soft whinny of a horse, the creak of the barn door, the faint rustle of hay, felt amplified in the quiet morning. The cowboy stayed alert, ready to react to any sudden movement or cry. He whispered to the baby, telling it was safe, that it would be okay. Even though the baby could not understand, the cowboy believed the calm tone helped, grounding both of them in a moment of fragile peace. Finally, the sound of a vehicle approaching broke the silence. He stepped outside, keeping an eye on the woman and the baby, signaling to the approaching helpers. Relief washed over him as neighbors and medical personnel arrived, rushing to take care of the woman and child. The cowboy handed over the baby carefully, his hands lingering just a moment longer to make sure it was secure. The woman was assisted gently, and the medical team quickly assessed her condition. As he watched them leave with the woman and baby, the cowboy felt a mixture of emotions: relief, gratitude, and quiet pride. He had been in the right place at the right time, and his attentiveness had made a difference. The barn was quiet again, but the memory of that morning would stay with him forever. The sound of a baby's cry in an empty barn, and the look of relief in a mother's eyes, was something he would never forget. He walked back to the barn, checking on the animals and restoring his morning routine. Life on the ranch continued, but he felt a deeper sense of connection that day, a reminder that even in solitude one could be called to act, and that one small action could save lives. The sunrise now seemed brighter, and the quiet of the plains felt different, filled with a new sense of hope and purpose. That morning had started like any other, with the cowboy performing his daily chores in the peaceful isolation of the ranch. But it ended with a reminder that life could surprise you in the most unexpected ways, and that courage, care, and attentiveness could change everything in a single moment. The moment the cowboy saw the woman and the baby, a surge of urgency ran through him. He had always known that life on a ranch could be unpredictable, but nothing had prepared him for this. The woman looked utterly exhausted, her body trembling slightly as she tried to lift herself from the hay. The baby continued to cry softly, the sound echoing through the barn. It was clear to him that both of them were in delicate condition. The cowboy's mind worked quickly, assessing what needed to be done first. He knew he had to act carefully and calmly. Panic would not help anyone. He knelt beside the woman, careful not to startle her. "You're going to be all right," he said, his voice steady and warm. "I've got the baby and I'm not going anywhere." The woman's eyes met his for a brief moment, a mixture of fear, gratitude, and relief flashing across her face. She tried to speak but could only whisper something incoherent. Her lips moved slightly, and the cowboy guessed she was trying to explain, but her strength had left her. Without hesitation, he picked up the baby, holding it gently against his chest. The child's cries softened as it felt the warmth and steady heartbeat of the man who had come to their rescue. The cowboy wrapped the baby carefully in his jacket, making sure it was secure and warm. He checked the tiny chest, making sure it rose and fell normally with each breath. The baby's eyes were wide, blinking against the sunlight streaming into the barn, and the cowboy felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. This little life depended entirely on him for the next few minutes, or possibly longer. Turning back to the woman, he helped her lean against a stack of hay, supporting her with a firm but gentle arm. She sagged against the soft surface, clearly too weak to remain standing. Her hands were cold and trembling, and he could see the strain in her pale face. "You need to stay still and drink some water," he said, handing her the canteen he carried with him for his morning chores. She took it slowly, trembling as she brought it to her lips. He waited patiently, giving her time to sip, watching carefully to make sure she didn't choke or collapse. The cowboy's mind raced as he tried to plan the next steps. The nearest town was miles away, and the roads were rough and dusty. But he knew he had to get professional help as quickly as possible. Pulling out his old radio, he adjusted the frequency and called for assistance. His voice was calm but firm as he explained the situation. A woman in severe distress and a newborn needing urgent care, located at the ranch. The crackling voice on the other end confirmed help was on the way. It might take some time, but knowing that someone was coming gave him a small measure of relief. While waiting, he stayed close to both the woman and the baby, making sure neither was left unattended. He checked the baby again, stroking its tiny back and whispering softly, trying to soothe it. "You're safe now. Don't worry, little one," he said gently. The baby's cries gradually slowed and its tiny fingers curled around the edge of his jacket. The cowboy marveled at the fragility of life, at how something so small and delicate could carry such an urgent call for care and attention. The woman's breathing was shallow, and the cowboy could see the effort it took for her to remain conscious. "I know it's hard," he said softly, "but you need to rest. Help is coming." He noticed how pale her lips were and how faintly her eyes darted around the barn, taking in every detail. It was clear she had been alone for a long time, struggling without any assistance. The thought made him more determined to stay calm and strong, to give her the reassurance she needed. He scanned the barn for anything that could help make her more comfortable while they waited. He moved a few hay bales together, creating a makeshift seat and backrest, allowing her to lean safely. He adjusted the baby so it rested against his chest, warm and secure. The cowboy's movements were deliberate, careful, and gentle. He spoke softly to the woman, keeping her engaged, hoping that conversation would help keep her mind off the exhaustion and fear. "Do you remember your name?" he asked gently. She tried to answer, and though her voice was faint, he caught her name. "All right," he said with a small smile. "We'll make sure you're safe, her name. Just keep breathing." He could see her eyelids flicker as she tried to focus on him, trying to stay awake. The cowboy knew that staying alert in moments like this was crucial, both for her and for the baby. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, and the ranch remained silent except for the small cries of the baby and the occasional shuffle of the cowboy moving to adjust the blanket. He stayed vigilant, checking the baby's breathing every few moments and making sure the woman remained awake. He spoke softly to both of them, recounting small stories from his life on the ranch, hoping the familiar and gentle words would bring comfort. Finally, the sound of a vehicle approaching broke the tense silence. The cowboy could hear the tires crunching on the gravel path leading to the barn. He stepped outside for a moment, looking toward the sound, and waved, signaling the approaching helpers. Relief washed over him as the medical team and a neighbor arrived quickly, moving with purpose and efficiency. They brought blankets, first aid supplies, and words of reassurance. The cowboy handed the baby over carefully, staying close just to make sure everything was handled gently. The woman was assisted into a more secure seat, wrapped in blankets, and checked for signs of dehydration and exhaustion. The medical professionals worked quickly, asking questions, assessing the baby, and giving the mother oxygen and water. The cowboy explained what had happened, recounting how he found them in the barn, how he had tended to them, and how he had kept them both safe until help arrived. He spoke calmly, but inside he felt the adrenaline of the morning slowly fading, replaced by relief. Once the immediate danger had passed, the cowboy stepped back and took a deep breath. He looked around the barn, noticing how the morning sunlight now spilled across the hay in warm, golden rays. The animals stirred softly, as if acknowledging that life had continued, and yet something extraordinary had happened within these quiet walls. The cowboy felt a deep sense of satisfaction and quiet pride. He had acted when it mattered most, and his presence had made a difference. As the woman and baby were prepared to leave with the medical team, she looked at him with gratitude that went beyond words. Her eyes, though still tired, shone with relief. The baby, now wrapped securely in a warm blanket, was quiet for the first time, as if sensing it was safe at last. The cowboy nodded, offering a small smile and a reassuring glance. "Take care," he said softly. "You're going to be all right now." After they were taken away, the cowboy remained in the barn for a few moments, reflecting on what had just occurred. The quiet of the ranch returned, but it was different now, changed by the events of the morning. He thought about the courage it must have taken for the woman to endure labor alone, about the fragility and strength of the newborn, and about the role he had played in keeping both of them safe. It was a reminder of how unpredictable life could be, and how one person's attention and care could mean the difference between life and death. The cowboy resumed his morning chores slowly, checking on the animals and making sure everything was in order. But his mind remained partly on the barn, on the tiny life he had held, and on the woman who had struggled so fiercely to protect her child. The morning had begun like any other, with routine and quiet, but it had become something extraordinary, a test of instinct, courage, and human connection. He paused for a moment, leaning on the fence post, looking out across the wide plains. The sky was brighter now, the colors of sunrise fading into the day. The wind carried a sense of calm, but also a gentle reminder that life was unpredictable, fragile, and precious. And in that quiet moment, the cowboy felt a renewed understanding of his place in the world, to watch, to act, and to care when it mattered most. The barn, now quiet, seemed to hold the memory of the morning within its old wooden walls. Every hay bale, every beam, every creak of the floorboard seemed to echo the small miracle that had taken place there. For the cowboy, the morning had been a lesson in vigilance, compassion, and the quiet power of being present when it counts. He knew that he would never forget the sound of that first cry, the look in the woman's eyes, or the weight of the tiny life he had held in his hands. Life on the ranch continued, but something inside the cowboy had changed. He felt more aware, more connected to the world around him, and more certain of the impact one person could have in a single, unexpected moment. That day in the barn would stay with him forever, a reminder of courage, hope, and the extraordinary strength of the human spirit. The cowboy stayed close as the medical team attended to the woman and her newborn. Even though he was not trained as a doctor, he instinctively knew what needed to be done to keep them safe until help arrived. He had grown up around hard work and emergencies on the ranch, and his calm presence seemed to reassure both the woman and the baby. The baby, now swaddled securely in warm blankets, had quieted down, occasionally letting out a soft whimper, while the woman slowly regained a little strength with water and the careful guidance of the medical professionals. Even with help arriving, the cowboy did not relax. He remained vigilant, moving carefully around the barn, checking that the animals were settled and that nothing could cause additional trouble. The horses nickered softly, sensing the tension in the barn had lifted slightly, But the cowboy knew the most important thing was to keep both mother and child calm and comfortable. He adjusted the blankets around the baby, keeping the tiny hands and feet warm, and checked the woman's posture, making sure she did not strain herself. While the medical team prepared to transport the woman and baby to the hospital, the cowboy spoke gently to her, asking questions to assess her condition. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked softly, kneeling beside her. She tried to respond, her voice still weak and trembling, but he could sense she was struggling to find the words. The cowboy waited patiently, offering calm reassurance as she collected her thoughts. Finally, the woman spoke, her words halting but clear. She had gone into labor unexpectedly, alone in a remote area with no way to reach anyone for help. Panic had set in as the contractions became stronger and closer together. She had tried to stay calm, but the pain and fear had made it nearly impossible. By the time the baby was born, she was weak and exhausted, barely able to hold herself up. She had managed to keep the newborn safe as best she could, but she had no idea what to do next. The cowboy listened attentively, nodding in understanding. He had faced many challenges on the ranch, but this was unlike anything he had ever seen. A woman giving birth alone in a remote barn with no one to help her, yet she had persevered. The cowboy felt a deep respect for her strength and courage. He spoke softly, telling her she had done well and that she was not alone anymore. His calm, steady voice seemed to ease some of her fear, and she relaxed slightly in the hay, letting the warmth of his presence comfort her. The medical team worked quickly to stabilize both the woman and the baby, checking vital signs and making sure they were safe for transport. The cowboy stayed nearby, watching closely as they wrapped the newborn in extra blankets and checked the mother's condition. He offered to carry the baby if needed, ensuring the little one remained safe and secure. As he held the small life in his hands, he felt a mix of awe and responsibility. The baby was so tiny and fragile, yet it carried a presence that demanded protection. While waiting for the final preparations, the cowboy spoke quietly to the woman, encouraging her to remain calm. "You're going to the hospital now," he said gently. "They'll take care of you and the baby. You did everything right. Just hold on a little longer." She nodded weakly, squeezing his hand briefly in gratitude. The cowboy could see the exhaustion in her eyes, but also a flicker of hope, a sign that she realized she was no longer alone in this difficult moment. The sound of the vehicle outside signaled that it was time to move. Carefully, the medical team helped the woman onto a stretcher while the cowboy held the baby close. He handed the tiny child to the attending nurse, making sure it was secure before stepping back. The woman looked up at him once more, her eyes filled with a silent thankfulness that words could not fully express. The cowboy nodded in return, a small smile crossing his face. He felt a deep sense of relief, knowing that both lives were finally in safe hands. As the vehicle drove away, the cowboy returned to the barn, taking a moment to reflect on what had just occurred. The quiet of the morning had returned, but the air felt different now, charged with the memory of the lives he had just helped save. He walked slowly among the hay bales and stalls, checking that everything was in order, but his thoughts were on the woman and her baby. He thought about the courage it must have taken for her to endure labor alone, and about the fragility of life he had just witnessed so closely. The cowboy thought back to the moment he first heard the baby's cry. It had been so faint at first, almost easy to miss. But he had listened carefully, followed his instincts, and acted quickly. That small act of awareness had made all the difference. He realized how important it was to remain alert and present, even in a life that often seemed slow and predictable. Life could change in a single moment, and being ready to act could mean the difference between life and death. Sitting down on a hay bale, the cowboy allowed himself a moment to breathe. He thought about the woman, about the courage she had shown, and about the new life that had entered the world in such a dramatic way. The barn, once quiet and ordinary, now held a story of survival, strength, and human connection. The cowboy felt humbled by the experience, aware that he had been given the chance to help in a way that would stay with him forever. As he looked around, he noticed small details he hadn't paid attention to before: the soft light filtering through the cracks in the barn walls, the dust particles floating in the sunbeams, the faint scent of hay mixed with the warmth of the morning air. It all seemed to carry a deeper meaning now, a reminder that life could be both ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. The cowboy reflected on how fragile life was, and how a single moment of attention, care, and courage could change everything. He thought about the future for the woman and her baby. They had survived the immediate danger, but the road ahead would require strength and support. The cowboy hoped they would find help, comfort, and a safe place to heal. He knew that life on the ranch continued, with its chores and routines, but he also knew that he had been part of something remarkable, something that went beyond the ordinary day-to-day tasks of ranch life. The cowboy spent the rest of the morning completing his usual chores, but his mind remained partly on the barn and the lives he had helped protect. He fed the horses, checked the fences, and carried water to the animals, but every movement reminded him of the fragile new life he had held and the woman who had fought so hard to keep her child safe. The rhythm of the ranch work was comforting, but it also gave him time to reflect on courage, compassion, and the unexpected ways life could challenge and inspire. By midday, the sun was high and the barn was quiet once again. The cowboy stepped outside, looking over the wide plains that stretched endlessly in every direction. He felt a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper connection to the world around him. That morning, he had witnessed the strength of the human spirit, the fragility of life, and the power of action in moments that mattered most. It was a lesson he would carry with him forever. He returned to the barn one last time before continuing his work, running his hands over the wooden beams and the piles of hay. The space was quiet, yet it seemed to hum with the memory of the morning, the cries, the fear, the relief, and the hope. The cowboy knew that the woman and baby were on their way to safety, and that knowledge gave him a profound sense of satisfaction. He realized that courage, calmness, and compassion had made all the difference, and that even in isolation, one person could create change in the world around them. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, the cowboy continued with his chores, feeling a quiet pride and gratitude. He had acted when it mattered most, and he had witnessed life in one of its most delicate and miraculous moments. The barn, the baby, the woman, they were all now part of his story, a reminder of the unexpected ways life could test strength and character. The morning had begun as any other, with routine and quiet work, but it had become a day he would never forget. The cries of a newborn, the courage of a mother, and the power of calm action had transformed the ordinary into something extraordinary. And as he stood alone in the wide-open plains, the cowboy understood more deeply than ever that life was fragile, precious, and full of moments that could define who we are. The woman's story began to unfold as the medical team stabilized her and the baby. Once she had regained enough strength to sit upright and focus, she looked at the cowboy with a mixture of gratitude and relief. She had survived a terrifying ordeal, and now, in the quiet of the barn, she finally felt able to explain. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, but there was a strength in her words that spoke volumes about what she had endured. She explained that she had been traveling alone, far from any town or family, when she suddenly went into labor. The nearest hospital was miles away, and she had no one to call for help. Panic had set in as the contractions grew stronger, and the isolation made every moment feel longer and more frightening. She had tried to stay calm, focusing on each contraction as it came, but fear and exhaustion quickly took their toll. By the time she realized she could no longer stand, she had already given birth in the barn with no assistance. The cowboy listened carefully, his face calm but his mind alert. He could see the pain etched on her face, the exhaustion in her posture, and the fear in her eyes. He did not interrupt her story, knowing that it was important for her to speak freely. As she continued, she told him how she had managed to keep the baby safe in the thin blanket she had found, trying to protect the child from the cold and the dust of the barn. She had been alone, desperate, and unsure if anyone would come. The cowboy felt a deep respect for her resilience. It was not easy to endure labor alone, and even harder to care for a newborn immediately after. Her courage and determination were remarkable, and he spoke gently to reassure her. "You did everything you could," he said. "You kept your baby safe and you stayed strong. That is incredible." The woman's eyes filled with tears, not from pain but from relief and gratitude. For the first time in hours, she felt safe and understood. She explained that she had been traveling because she needed a fresh start. Circumstances in her life had left her alone and far from home, but she had tried to remain hopeful. The labor had been unexpected, and she had not prepared for the possibility of giving birth without help. She described the fear of being alone, the isolation of the remote barn, and the overwhelming responsibility of protecting her newborn with nothing but her own strength and instinct. The cowboy remained calm, offering words of encouragement. He helped her adjust in the hay so that she could rest without straining her body further. He spoke softly to the baby, who had become quiet in the warmth of the blankets. He marveled at the way the little one seemed to sense safety after the chaos of birth. The bond between mother and child was clear, even in the brief moments he observed, and he felt honored to witness it. The medical team, while attending to the woman, asked about her medical history and if she had experienced any complications. The woman answered as best she could, explaining that she had been generally healthy, but had never expected to face such a situation alone. The cowboy assisted where he could, providing comfort and stability, ensuring that both mother and child felt secure. He realized how important his calm presence had been in helping her manage fear and exhaustion. She went on to describe the moments just before he arrived. After the baby was born, she had tried to lift herself to check on the newborn, but her strength had left her completely. She had felt helpless, unsure if anyone would come, and feared for the baby's life. The cries of the newborn were both a comfort and a terror. They were a reminder that the child was alive, but also that someone needed to help. She had been praying for assistance, though she had no idea who might hear her call. When the cowboy appeared, she had felt a mix of disbelief and relief. Here was a stranger, strong and calm, who had responded immediately to the cries she had made in desperation. He had acted without hesitation, taking the baby, providing warmth and reassurance, and helping her stay conscious. She described how his presence had been like a lifeline, steadying her when everything seemed overwhelming. His actions had made the impossible feel manageable. The woman spoke about the emotions she had experienced throughout the ordeal. Fear had been constant, but so had determination. She had focused on the baby, trying to stay alert and protect the newborn from any danger. Even in her weakest moments, she had refused to give up, driven by the instinct to ensure the child's survival. The cowboy listened intently, realizing that she had displayed remarkable courage and resilience. She also described how grateful she felt for the simple things the cowboy had done, holding the baby, adjusting blankets, providing water, and speaking calmly. Those small gestures had meant everything in her moment of vulnerability. She expressed how they had made her feel seen and supported, reminding her that even in isolation, human connection could provide strength. The cowboy nodded quietly, understanding fully. He had acted instinctively, but now he saw the profound impact of his actions. The woman told him she had no way of knowing how long she might have been alone if he had not heard the baby's cries. She had been terrified, imagining the worst, yet somehow had continued to fight. Her gratitude was deep, and her eyes reflected the relief of having survived what could have been a tragedy. The cowboy felt a mix of humility and pride. He had acted as anyone would hope in such a situation, but the courage had ultimately come from the woman herself. The conversation also allowed the woman to process the events, to put words to the fear and exhaustion she had felt. Speaking about her experience helped her regain a sense of control after hours of vulnerability. The cowboy remained a patient listener, offering comfort and reassurance without interrupting or dismissing her story. His steady presence allowed her to release some of the tension she had carried since labor began. As the medical team prepared to transport her and the baby to the hospital, she took a moment to gather her thoughts. She thanked the cowboy sincerely, not just for his actions, but for his calm demeanor and patience. He had been the bridge between desperation and safety, and she recognized the difference he had made. The cowboy offered a humble smile, telling her she had done the hard part by surviving and caring for her newborn. Together, they had made it through the most critical moments. The woman and baby were placed into the vehicle, and the cowboy ensured they were settled safely. As the vehicle pulled away toward the hospital, the woman waved to him, tears in her eyes. The cowboy watched until they disappeared from sight, a quiet sense of fulfillment and relief washing over him. He knew that both lives were now in safe hands, and that his actions had played a crucial role in ensuring their survival. Afterward, the cowboy returned to the barn, walking among the hay bales and animals. He reflected on the story the woman had shared and the extraordinary courage she had shown. Life on the ranch continued, but he carried the memory of that morning with him. The fear, the determination, the newborn's cries, and the woman's perseverance. It was a reminder of the power of human strength and compassion, and of the difference one person's attentiveness and action could make. The barn, now quiet again, seemed to hum with the memory of the day's events. Every detail, the hay, the sunlight, the faint sounds of the animals, felt imbued with a new significance. The cowboy thought about how life could change in an instant, and how courage, resilience, and quick thinking could shape outcomes in ways that were impossible to predict. He realized that moments like this defined who we are, and that even in isolation, our actions have the power to impact others profoundly. He continued his work on the ranch, feeding the horses and checking fences, but his mind often returned to the woman and her baby. He imagined them safe at the hospital, recovering and beginning a new chapter. The experience had left an indelible mark on him, a reminder that life was fragile, precious, and often unpredictable. Every day held the possibility of challenge and the opportunity to act with courage and compassion. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the plains, the cowboy paused to take in the view. He felt gratitude for the chance to help, respect for the woman's strength, and awe at the resilience of new life. The events of the day had transformed what began as an ordinary morning into something extraordinary, a testament to the power of human connection, courage, and care. The memory of the woman's story and the newborn's cries would remain with him forever. It was a reminder that even in the most unexpected moments, we have the capacity to act with courage and kindness. The cowboy understood more deeply than ever that life is fragile, yet full of resilience, and that the smallest actions can have the greatest impact. After the woman and her baby were safely taken to the hospital, the cowboy returned to the quiet of the ranch. The barn, once filled with urgent cries and fear, was now still. The animals went about their usual routines, nuzzling hay or grazing quietly in the sunlight, unaware of the extraordinary events that had unfolded just hours before. The cowboy paused for a moment at the barn door, leaning against the worn wooden frame, and reflected on everything that had happened. The morning had begun like any other, with routine chores and the soft sounds of life on the ranch. But it had turned into a story of courage, resilience, and human connection. He thought about the woman, her strength during labor, and the determination she had shown to protect her newborn. Even in the face of exhaustion and fear, she had refused to give up. He remembered the look in her eyes, a mixture of gratitude and relief, and realized how deeply moments like these could leave a mark on a person's life. The cowboy felt a quiet pride in what he had done, but he knew it was only part of the story. The real courage had come from the woman herself, from her ability to endure pain and uncertainty with the life of her child at stake. He had acted to assist, to provide calm and care, but she had been the one to bring the newborn into the world and keep it safe against all odds. That realization humbled him. It reminded him that sometimes being present, listening, and acting with steadiness could be just as important as physical strength or skill. He walked slowly through the barn, checking on the horses and the equipment, but his mind kept returning to the events of the morning. The cries of the newborn, the struggle of the mother, and the rapid decisions he had made to ensure their safety, all these details replayed vividly in his memory. Every sound and movement had mattered. Even small actions like adjusting blankets, offering water, or speaking gently had made a difference. He understood now more than ever the importance of awareness and empathy in moments of crisis. The cowboy thought about the journey the woman and baby now faced. They were heading to the hospital, where professionals would provide care and support. He hoped they would find comfort, healing, and stability in the days ahead. The thought brought him peace, knowing that the immediate danger had passed. But he also understood that the impact of that morning would last far beyond the ranch, beyond the barn, and even beyond the woman and her child. It was a reminder of the enduring power of human compassion. Sitting on a bale of hay, the cowboy allowed himself a rare moment of stillness. The sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows across the open plains. The air was warm and carried the faint scent of grass and hay. For a man accustomed to solitude and routine, these moments of reflection were rare but meaningful. He considered how life could change in a single instant, how one person's attention, courage, and care could alter the course of another's life. The memory of the baby's cry lingered in his mind. That small sound had set everything into motion. It had drawn him to the barn and led to a chain of events that saved 2 lives. He realized that sometimes the smallest details, a cry, a movement, a moment of hesitation, could carry enormous significance. The experience had taught him that vigilance and compassion were not just virtues but practical tools that could shape outcomes in real and meaningful ways. The cowboy also reflected on the lessons he had learned about human connection. Even strangers could make a profound difference when they acted with kindness and courage. He had been a solitary figure on the ranch for most of his life, but that morning had reminded him that connections, no matter how brief, could be life-changing. He thought about the woman and her child, about the courage it had taken to survive, and about the shared humanity that had brought them together in the barn that morning. As the day progressed, the cowboy returned to his routine tasks, but he approached them with a renewed sense of purpose. Feeding the horses, repairing fences, and tending to the land were not just chores. They were opportunities to remain aware, to care for life, and to be present in each moment. The events of the morning had transformed his perspective, teaching him that every day, every action, and every decision carried weight. Even the ordinary could become extraordinary when approached with attention and compassion. Neighbors who had heard of the incident came by later, bringing warm food and kind words. They expressed their admiration for the cowboy's actions, praising his quick thinking and courage. The cowboy accepted their words humbly, emphasizing that anyone in his place would have done the same. He reminded them that the true heroism belonged to the woman, whose resilience and determination had carried her through labor alone. The community, however, saw both as examples of human strength, the mother for enduring, the cowboy for responding with care. That evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold. The cowboy walked out to the edge of the ranch and gazed across the open plains. The land was quiet, the wind soft, carrying the scent of grass and earth. He thought about the woman and her baby, now safe in the hospital, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had witnessed life at its most vulnerable, and he had been able to act in a way that mattered. The experience reminded him that courage and kindness were not abstract ideas, they were actions that shaped the world around us. The cowboy returned to the barn one last time before nightfall. He ran his hands over the wooden beams, touched the hay bales, and recalled the events of the morning in vivid detail. Every sound, every movement, and every cry had been part of a larger story of survival, courage, and human connection. The barn, once ordinary, now felt sacred in a quiet way, a place where life had been protected and hope had been restored. As night settled over the ranch, the cowboy lit a small lantern and prepared for the evening chores. He fed the animals, checked the fences, and made sure everything was in order. The stars began to appear, scattered across the dark sky, and he felt a sense of peace. The events of the day had tested him, taught him, and left a lasting impression. He knew that life on the ranch would continue, but the memory of the woman and her baby would remain with him forever, a reminder of what it meant to act with courage, compassion, and attention when it mattered most. The cowboy's mind wandered to the future. He hoped that the woman and her baby would thrive, that they would find safety, love, and support in the days ahead. He imagined the baby growing strong, the mother regaining her health, and both finding happiness after the trial they had faced. The thought filled him with quiet joy, knowing that his actions had contributed to a new beginning for two lives. He also thought about his own life, and the way it had been changed by the experience. The morning had reminded him that even in a life of routine and solitude, moments of extraordinary significance could occur. It had shown him the value of presence, the importance of acting quickly in emergencies, and the profound impact one person could have on another's life. The cowboy felt a renewed commitment to approach each day with awareness, care, and empathy. As he closed the barn door for the night, the cowboy looked back once more at the wide-open plains. The stars shone brightly, and the world felt vast, peaceful, and full of possibility. He thought about the small, powerful moments of life, the cries, the acts of courage, the gestures of care that made a difference beyond measure. The morning had been one such moment, a reminder that life's greatest tests often come unexpectedly, and that courage, compassion, and presence can change everything. Finally, as he settled into his small cabin for the night, the cowboy reflected on the lessons of the day. He had seen courage in its purest form, witnessed the fragility and resilience of life, and acted to protect and care when it mattered most. The events of the morning had left an indelible mark on him, a story he would carry forever. It was a story of hope, human connection, and the extraordinary strength that exists within ordinary people. Life on the ranch continued as it always did, but the cowboy felt different. He was more aware, more compassionate, and more grateful for the opportunities to make a difference. The barn, the woman, and the newborn had reminded him of the profound power of small actions and the importance of being present when lives depend on it. And as the night deepened and the world outside his cabin grew quiet, he closed his eyes with the comforting thought that courage, empathy, and care could truly change the world, one life at a time.